Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Friday, November 24th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The game against Michigan is tomorrow. It is almost here. Before we get to that, we're going to have our buddy Ross Fulton on the show again. Ross, of course, the X's and O's guru at BuckeyeHuddle.com. And when we have Ross on the show is presented by Jeff Ruby Steakhouse, the award-winning upscale steakhouse in downtown Columbus, named one of the top 50 steakhouses in America by Food Network. Thank you to Jeff Ruby for sponsoring it. Thank you for Ross for being here again today. We're going to be talking about the Ohio State defense. Boy, Ross, the conversation around the Ohio State defense this year is so much different than it was 11 months ago after the Georgia game, when they had just gotten gashed for big plays and given up 40 points in back-to-back games and the 5 big plays against Michigan. It feels like they have solved the problems. They've given up one 40-yard play all year long, and that was that weird fumble Ruski play against Rutgers. Jim Knowles was asked about it and looked like terrified, like, don't say those words out loud. Is it for real? Has Ohio State really solved their issues, or is this a, well, we'll see when they play Michigan kind of thing?
I mean, they're number one in SP plus defense at this point, and that's not even like being helped by preseason rankings because they started out in the teens. So, I mean, I probably even underestimated some level how good they've been because they don't wow you, right, with like Chase Young type plays to create negative plays. They are increasingly forcing turnovers. I mean, Jordan Hancock's really becoming quite a player at nickel. But yeah, I mean, they're for real. Like they just are really solid. And so even last year, like even smart Michigan partisans would acknowledge that the explosives that Michigan created were somewhat fluky in that game. Like that doesn't, if you play that game 10 times, that kind of stuff doesn't happen 10 times. But I just, that is not my concern in this game, that like somehow all of a sudden they're going to put someone in who hasn't played in weeks and he falls down and gives up a touchdown.
That seems like they have largely learned that lesson, I think, after last year. So we'll see how this goes this year. I guess let's start up front. Ohio State defensive line, they've been pretty solid all year. Michigan on the offensive line, this is not the Joe Moore award-winning Michigan offensive line of previous years. The middle of the line seems fine. The tackle spots, a little dicey. Is that more of a concern for Michigan in the run game or in the pass game?
Both. I agree with your assessment. I don't think Michigan's guards are very good. Center's okay. The tackles have had some concerns. I'd say probably more in the passing game than the run game, but they have not been as good of a run team as they were the previous 2 years. Part of that is the offensive line's not as good. Part of that is I don't think that Blake Corum is quite the same as he was prior to his injury last year. But so they have to protect themselves. And I don't think their tight ends are quite as good at blockers as their tight ends were in previous seasons. So, they're not a team like, yes, they did this against Penn State, that they just kept running it. That was a game that lent itself to that because Penn State had no chance of ever doing anything offensively. And B, Manny Diaz, as we've talked about Manny Diaz, does Manny Diaz things that are unsound, and Jim Knowles does not do that. But so for Ohio State, though, I mean, their defensive ends definitely need to win, right? And like they need to control the action. I think they can. They need to, and we'll get into this, but like I think the big question for Ohio State is how do they account for JJ McCarthy's legs? So Michigan, I mean, McCarthy seems like he's kind of banged up, knee or ankle or something. But he still did run around. He ran some against Maryland. He obviously ran against Penn State, and they sort of saved that for when they need it. McCarthy is not good at running read plays. Like in terms of like doing the actual mechanics of reading the play, I tend to think when Michigan calls those, it's more a bet by the staff that the defense is going to overplay the base run and that McCarthy will get to keep. But even when he does it, even when he reads it wrong, he can still make plays because he's pretty dynamic with his legs, and they have designed runs too. And so we saw against Rutgers, as we talked about, like Jim Knowles likes to spill with the defensive ends. But we have seen in recent weeks, and increasingly, sometimes they'll have the defensive ends contain They're running some more cover 4 to have Sonny Styles come down and fill the backside C gap. So I would look for Knowles to continue to mix it up in terms of the looks they're giving and for read plays, because I do think they have to assume that McCarthy can keep and run, and they have to account for that, which helps the Michigan run game. The other thing that will be interesting is how does Ohio State handle Michigan's 12 personnel, because that's essentially their base. Like it's probably 55-45. They'll run 2 tight ends. I personally think, and I think Jim Knowles sort of hinted at this during his press conference on Tuesday, I think that they will stick with Jordan Hancock as much as possible. First of all, I think that Colson Loveland, I kind of consider him a poor man's Brock Bowers. Like, he's more of a big slot receiver than an actual inline tight end. I also think we've talked about how effective Hancock is in the run game. And you also have 2 very big safeties who like to play the run that you can scheme to do so. I just don't think, especially with Latham Ransom assumingly out, I don't think that you want to get in a situation where you're taking Hancock off the field too much. Now, if Michigan goes to that extra offensive line package that they showed against Penn State and they use a little against Maryland, that's where I think you bring in Cody Simon. But again, Ohio State has the advantage that they have safeties who are happy to play against the run. And I think that Knowles is going to have to change up coverages, but I do think you'll see he'll mix some cover 4 with some cover 1 where he lets Josh Proctor get down in the box. Because as we talked about all year, like when a push comes to shove, like they've been very effective stopping the run with that concept.
There's been a bunch of questions this week about if Michigan goes to that 6 offensive line, 2 tight end kind of package, does Ohio State go to a 5 defensive line alignment? That has very much not been a Larry Johnson thing. Larry Johnson is a 4-down dude. Larry Johnson has always been a 4-down dude. Do you think the answer is you bring in Cody Simon, you just kind of go from a 4-2-5 to a 4-3, or do they screw around with bringing in an extra defense tackle? What is the counterpunch there?
Yeah, and it depends on the specifics of where they're lining guys up. I personally would probably start with the 4-3 and see how that goes. I mean, Penn State, part of their issue is that they're a little undersized on the edges. And so that's what hurt them. Like, that one big Corum run was a duo play where they lost leverage because they had like a 217-pound linebacker out there. And so, again, I think your first step is you put Cody Simon at Sam there and you bring Josh Proctor down as a C-gap defender. We did see the one play action against Penn State from that look. So, you can't assume, again, you got to be able to match Loveland, especially if he's in the game in that situation. But I personally would think that would be my first step and see how it goes. I think that's been Jim Knowles' MO this year too, is like, let's try to stay light until we can't. And then if I have to adjust, I will, but I'd rather start with that than get myself burned by going overly aggressive against the run.
What would be your biggest concern against Michigan in the passing game? Is it hitting Colson Loveland? He's been very, very effective for them as a receiver. Is it Roman Wilson, assuming Roman Wilson is back after setting out the last 3 quarters or so against Maryland last week? It sounds like you're not super, super concerned about multiple big plays hitting over the top again this year. So what is it just J.J. McCarthy getting out of the pocket and buying time and then having to cover for so long? What is kind of the biggest concern to you as far as the pass defense for Ohio State?
Yeah, it's letting McCarthy break contain and scramble drill. Like, that's where I think he's really hurt teams this year, is when things break down and he gets outside the pocket. I think that you have to rush him in a way that hems him in, whether you do that through just your 4-man rush, whether you do that through certain pressures that basically that forces him to escape to one side, and then you bring a linebacker to that side as essentially a spy and you rush him into that linebacker. That would be my first concern starting up front, is keeping him in the pocket. I think that in terms of his receivers, the ones you listed, I agree. I would start with Roman Wilson. He likes hitting Roman Wilson on deep over routes. And then I would go to the tight ends that, they use a lot of option routes or stick routes with them. So, those are definitely, in terms of the weapons who you're looking at. I don't think you need to do what I would do though is continue to mix up coverages. I don't think that McCarthy has been great when he has to diagnose different coverages. And so, I mean, Knowles has been doing that. So I would just stick with what you're doing. You know, like there was a series against Minnesota where it was like cover 4 one play, then cover 3, then cover 1, then cover 2. Like, you know, they are running the gamut at this point. Like you name it, they're doing it. And they're doing it pretty well. And so I expect to see more cover 1 in this game than they've run in recent weeks. But I still think you're going to kind of try to mix up coverages. You know, McCarthy's pick against Maryland came off of Tampa too, which Ohio State runs quite a bit. So I think that's the key. But again, I think it starts with trying to keep McCarthy in the pocket, even if you're having to rush in a way that reduces your chance of an immediate sack. I would rather force him to sit in there and continue to go through progressions than get outside and let Wilson break off a route and suddenly, you know, you've got a 15, 20-yard gain off a scramble drill.
Watching that game against Maryland last week, the sequence that jumped out to me more than any other regarding J.J. McCarthy was the one right before halftime where they get down into the red zone. They've got a chance to really, really put the game away. And first and goal, he throws to, I mean, it looked like one of 2 Maryland defenders was the intended receiver. He hit the guy got his hands on it, dropped, but that was first down. Why are you forcing that ball in there in the end zone on first and goal? Second and goal, doesn't see it underneath defender, throws an interception, like 2 in a row. And not just the read, but more the decision-making where it's first and goal. Why are you trying to force the ball into an area where there are like multiple defenders? It's first and goal. Throw it out of bounds. Like, is this a make JJ McCarthy beat you game? Is that the mindset? Stop the run. Don't let him run. Make him beat you with his arm. Is that how you would approach this game?
So to your point, I mean, I don't know what his turnover-worthy throws are this year as a stat, but I feel like whenever I've watched Michigan, I feel like he makes a couple throws that could be interceptions. And I think this is where sometimes when you don't get tested, it can come back to bite you, because I think he's gotten away with some throws this year against easier competition that were like, you know, by the skin of his teeth. And it's like, whoa, look, that's a great highlight play. And it's like, you know, against, you know, that works maybe against Michigan State this year, but it doesn't against a better defensive team. And so he sort of gunslings it, right? Like he'll throw back against his body. He'll take chances. In terms of like make McCarthy beat me again, I would not do that. I necessarily in the sense of like, we're going to load up the box and play cover 1 every play and, you know, see what happens and take our chances, because I just think that when they, like, for instance, like Purdue is a heavy cover 1 team, right? And so when Michigan knew that it was likely that Purdue was going to be in cover 1, like they do a nice job with motion and formations to free Wilson and get him open against man with picks and rubs. Once Purdue, and it was sort of too late for them, but once they realized like that was the case and they started mixing zones, all of a sudden it was like put Michigan in mud, because then he had to diagnose the coverage. The calls weren't necessarily the right ones for the zone. So all this is to say that like I think Jim Knowles, you know, like Ryan Day on offense, like should continue doing what they've been doing in the last month in terms of mixing up his coverages, mixing up his gap responsibilities up front to try to slow down the processing from McCarthy. And then, yes, that makes it maybe sometimes, I mean, I think this will be a game, because Ohio State's done it this year, where there's going to be a couple of annoying, like Michigan got 4 yards on that run play and 5 yards and 4, and they get a couple first downs, and then Knowles tries to tighten the screws down. So I don't see them like selling out to stop the run. I don't think Michigan, when Michigan's done well this year, it hasn't been because they've ran the ball just right down at people's throats. It's because they've been able to hit some big plays off the passing game.
Well, we will see whether they can hit some big plays off the passing game, whether they can run the ball down the field, how Jim Knowles and Ryan Day will respond on both sides of the ball. We will see that all tomorrow. We've been waiting all year for this game. It is finally almost here. Kevin and Tony and I will be headed up to Ann Arbor a little later on today. We will have a live show for you coming from the Ohio State team hotel. The Buckeyes expected to arrive kind of early evening. So the best way to make sure you are on that and you get to see Ryan Day and the Buckeyes arrive and hear from Ryan Day as the team gets there is to be subscribed to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. Hit that subscribe button, hit that bell so you get notified. We will do our best to let you know when they're actually getting there. Ohio State busing up there, busing back. So the timetable is not necessarily as precise as an airplane. So we will make sure we let you know as soon as we can when that team arrival is coming. Then we're expected to do probably another live show after that. I'm sure there's going to be plenty to talk about later tonight. And then tomorrow, game day, lots of live coverage, lots of coverage, all at BuckeyeHuddle.com, youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. Just make sure you're subscribed all of the places. I'm going to guess there's going to be a fair amount to talk about before, during, and after that game. The best place to do that is at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. Let's talk to you tomorrow.